Respected resource person for the session, Dr. Joseph Doreraj, Dean, School of English and Foreign Languages, Gandhigram Rural Institute, Deemed to be University, Dindigal. Dr. Sister Gisela George, Principal, Mercy College, Palakkad. Webinar Coordinator, Dr. Trusina M. Alapat. Faculty members, research scholars, and students. Good morning to all. Welcome to the second day of the national webinar, PRAJWALA, webinar on research methodology, research ethics, literary theory, and praxis. Today's keynote sessions will focus on two intellectual movements that took the academic world by storm in the 1960s and 1970s. Two divergent approaches to language and signification that revolutionized the way we look at language, culture, and reality. It gives me great pleasure welcoming our resource person for the session, a luminary in the academic world, and an expert in literary theory, Dr. Joseph Doreraj. Dr. Doreraj is Professor of English and Dean, School of English and Foreign Languages, Gandhigram Rural Institute, Dindigal. Dr. Doreraj has also been the Vice Chancellor acting of Gandhigram Rural University from 2013 to 2014. Dr. Doreraj was a Fulbright scholar, and in 2014, he visited educational institutions in Washington, D.C., New York, and Miami, and was Erasmus Mundus visiting scholar at Catholic University, Leuven, Belgium, in 2015. He has also visited universities in Rome, the Netherlands, France, and Sri Lanka. Dr. Doreraj has authored 4 books and edited 2. He has also co-authored English textbooks for schools in Tamil Nadu. He delivers lectures at UGC HRDCs and has given endowment lectures in different colleges and universities in South India. He has been member of the Research Council of IGNOU New Delhi from 2007 to 2013 and its Academic Council for the keynote speaker today, sir. And on behalf of the Department of English and the participants of the webinar, I accord a warm welcome to you, sir. Let me also welcome our dear principal, Dr. Sister Gisela, webinar coordinator, Dr. Trusina, faculty, research scholars, and students to this webinar. Dr. Joseph Doreraj's keynote address is titled Socio and Structuralism, an Overview. May I call upon Dr. Doreraj to deliver the keynote address. Thank you. Sir, can you hear me? Sir, there's some problem with the audio. We can't hear you. Sir, please unmute. We can't hear you. Sir, the problem with the audio process. We can't hear you, sir. Proceed.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We are able to hear you now.
Okay,
Hello.
I think, yes.
Yes, sir. You're audible now. I think you can begin.
Okay, I'll begin.
Okay, sir.
So, good morning, Mercy family. At the outset, I would like to thank the principal of Mercy College, Palakkad, for this warm invitation extended to me. I also thank the head of the department, Dr. Sheena John, and the coordinators, Dr. Turisena, Dr. Prasida, and Ms. Priyanka, not only for organizing this seminar, but also for inviting me to this webinar. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be speaking on Saussure and structuralism, and that is the topic the organizers gave me. And I'll present my screen. Can you see my PowerPoint? Hello, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So dear friends, the topic of my presentation is Saussure and structuralism and overview. And please look at the screen. This would give you an idea of my presentation. Now my presentation has been divided into 6 parts or 6 units. First, I would very briefly talk about Saussurean linguistics. and what is Sassurian linguistics known for or famous for. I'll be outlining the 6 major insights of Saussure and his linguistics. So that would constitute the first part of my presentation. In the second part of my presentation, I'll be very briefly addressing the question, what is structuralism? And once I am done with answering this question, I will move on to the third unit of my presentation, wherein I will try to answer this question, what is structuralist poetics? Then in the fourth part of my presentation, very briefly, I'll be talking about the limitations of structuralism. And in the fifth part of my presentation, there is only one slide. I will briefly outline the passage or transition from structuralism to post-structuralism and deconstruction. And I will wrap up my presentation by giving a list of important books on Saussure. So, dear friends, this is the scheme of my presentation, and I should be taking something like 70 minutes, a little more than an hour, and maybe we can have some 10 to 15 minutes for discussion, for some questions and answers. Now, please take a look at this slide. This will give you an idea of who Ferdinand de Saussure was. Now, the first thing that comes to our mind when we talk of Saussure is this: he is considered, he is hailed the father of modern linguistics. In fact, whenever we talk about linguistics, we talk about before Saussure and after Saussure. And this would underline the preeminent position that Saussure occupies in linguistics. He taught comparative philology, and later he taught general linguistics as well. So these are the subjects that Saussure taught at the University of Geneva. Now, what is interesting is during 2007, during 2008 and 9, and during 2010 and 11, Saussure gave 3 lectures. And these 3 lectures later became his book, his seminal book, called or titled Course in General Linguistics. Now, there is an interesting story about this book, and we are all very familiar with this book. There are 2 significant facts about this book. The first significant fact is this book was published 3 years after Saussure died. So this is a posthumous publication. Saussure died in 1913, and the book Course in General Linguistics in French, originally in French. It was published 3 years after his death, that was in 1916. But the most interesting point about this book is, even though we attribute the authorship of this book, Course in General Linguistics, to Ferdinand de Saussure, the fact is this book was never written by Saussure himself. So what happened was, as I mentioned earlier, during 2007, during 2008 and 9, and during 2010 and 11, Saussure gave a series of lectures on general linguistics. Now, unfortunately, he had not written this book yet, and he passed away. So what happened was, his students, they realized that these lectures delivered in 2007, 2008 and 9, and 2010 and 11, these lectures contain some brilliant ideas and insights on language and linguistics. And they realized that these theories, these concepts, and these insights should be made available to the future generations. So therefore, what they did was, 2 of his students, they put together their class notes, the lecture notes, they collated it, edited it, and brought it out as a book. And this was in the year 1916, and it was originally published in French. So please remember, the original French version came out in 1916, and we had to wait till 1959. I repeat, we had to wait till 1959 for the first English translation to appear. And right now we have 2 translations. The first English translation appeared in 1959, and the second English translation appeared in 1983. The first translation, 1959, the translator was Baskin, and the second translation that appeared in 1983, the translator is Roy Harris. And there is a minor difference between these 2 translations. some of the terms, okay, from French to English, Baskin uses two different terms and Roy Harris uses two different terms, but I'll be sticking to the first translation, the translation by Wade Baskin. So dear friends, this slide would have given you an overall idea of Saussure and his contribution. Now let me move to the second slide. Now, when I started my presentation, I made this observation that Saussure is considered, or Saussure is hailed, or Saussure is glorified as the father of modern linguistics. Now, on what basis, on what grounds do we consider Saussure as the father of modern linguistics? So what is his contribution? Or to reframe the question, or to reformulate the question, what does this book consist of? Course in general linguistics. What is so special? What is so significant about this book? What is there in this book? Now, this book, Course in General Linguistics, originally published in 1919 in French, it contains 6 major insights, and in the first part of my presentation I will be talking about these 6 major insights. So the first major insight is, how do we look at language? How do we look at Malayalam, and what is a verbal sign? And what are the 2 dimensions, or what are the 2 facets of any linguistic sign? And what is the nature, or what is the character of the linguistic sign? I'll be talking about it a little later. And this is the second major insight of Saussure. And the third major insight of Saussure is, he talks about the personal dimension of language, and he also talks about the social dimension of language. The social dimension of language is langue, he uses the French word, and parole, that would be the personal individual dimension of language, and I'll be talking about it a little later. So the fourth major idea of Saussure is, he talks about how one sign, one word is distinguished from another word, and he talks about it in terms of differential identity or relational identity, both at the level of the signifier and at the level of the signified. And the fifth major theory of Saussure is, he talks about the syntagmatic dimension of Malayalam and the paradigmatic dimension of Malayalam, the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. And he is also considered the founder of semiology. Okay, so these are the 6 major theories or 6 major insights of Saussure: diachronic and synchronic, what is a linguistic sign, and what is the nature of the linguistic sign, langue and parole, the distinction between these two, differential or relational identity of linguistic signs, and the syntagmatic and the paradigmatic dimensions of language, and also what is semiology or what is semiotics. Now, this slide talks about what is diachronic and what is synchronic. Now, Saussure, in A Course in General Linguistics, he makes it very clear. How do you look at any language? How do you approach any language? He says we have 2 options, we have 2 perspectives. You can look at the language from a diachronic point of view, that is a historical point of view, or you can look at language from a synchronic point of view. Now, what is this diachronic and what is this synchronic, and what is the connection or association between the diachronic and the synchronic? Now, the diachronic is the historical perspective across time and from an evolutionary point of view. For instance, I'm sure maybe in Mercy College, in most colleges, in most universities, when they talk about history of English language, when they deal with the paper on linguistics, usually they prescribe the book by F.T. Wood, and the title of the book is History of English Language. So what does F.T. Wood do in this book? He talks about the birth of the English language, how from Angles, Saxons and Jutes, Old English was formed from the language of the Angles and Saxons. So it was called Anglo-Saxon, and it was also called Old English. And from Old English evolved Middle English, and from Middle English we have Modern English, and from Modern English we have contemporary 20th century and 21st century English. So in other words, in his book, F.T. Wood adopts a historical approach to the birth, the growth, and the development of the English language. Now, such a perspective could be adopted to talk about Malayalam. When and how was Malayalam born, and the different stages of the growth and the development of Malayalam. So this would be the diachronic perspective. So Sasu would argue you can look at any language from a historical perspective or from a diachronic perspective, and a historical perspective or a diachronic perspective would involve an evolutionary point of view. So that is about diachronic. Now, somebody says, I am not interested in history. So, therefore, I am not going to adopt a historical or a diachronic perspective of language. For instance, I am interested in Shakespeare's language, or somebody else says, I am interested in T.S. Eliot's language, or somebody says, I am interested in Chaucer's language, or somebody else says, I am interested in analyzing Middle English. So, which means Anandam has used to Malayalam, particularly in his poetry. So that would be a synchronic perspective. Or somebody else says, in the early part of the 20th century, a particular author. Fine. Now the point is, what is exactly the connection or the association between
Sir, you are not audible. Excuse me, sir. You are not audible.
Hello, I'm sorry about the technical glitch. Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible. Please continue.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, dear friends, I'm sorry about. Okay, before I lost my connection, I was talking about the nature of the linguistic sign. I think I will continue with this. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so dear friends, I was talking about the nature of the linguistic sign, and I was trying to answer three important questions. So the first question is, what is a linguistic sign and what are the two dimensions of the linguistic sign? So that would be the second question. And the third question is, what is the nature or what is the character of the linguistic sign? Now, as we all know, any word in any language is a linguistic sign or a verbal sign. For instance, the word cat, C-A-T, that is a linguistic sign. The word phone, P-H-O-N-E, phone, so that is a linguistic sign. The word watch, W-A-T-C-H, so that is a linguistic sign. So therefore, any word in any language is a linguistic sign. And all linguistic signs or all verbal signs, they have two dimensions, namely signifier and signified. And I would like to point out that I am using the translation of Wade Baskin. Now, Roy Harris, his translation uses two different terms for this, but usually experts stick to these two terms, namely signifier and signified. Now, what is a signifier? The signifier is the acoustic or the phonological dimension, whereas the signified is the referent. In other words, when I pronounce the word cat, cat, cat. So what am I doing now? I am converting this word into a sequence of sounds. I am converting this word into a string of phonemes. So that would be the signifier associated with the sounds. Therefore, it is acoustic or phonological. So when you say a Malayalam word, when you pronounce a Hindi word, when you pronounce an Odia word, when you pronounce a Bangla word, so what you're doing is you're converting it into sounds, you are converting it into phonemes. So that is the signifier. Now when I say cat, when I pronounce cat, when I articulate cat, I am producing some sounds. So these sounds, what do they refer to? What do they point to? So the referent, that would be the signified. Okay, so what is a linguistic sign? Any word in any language is a linguistic sign, and all linguistic signs have two dimensions, namely the signifier and the signified. And the third question is the most important question, and it is this question that serves as the basis or the foundation or the fulcrum for all discussion of not only structuralism but also post-structuralism and deconstruction, and I'll be talking about very briefly towards the end. Fine. Now the question is, you take the word cat, C-A-T, cat. Now, what exactly is the connection or the association between this word and the object, the domestic animal it refers to? Okay, so in other words, pointing to the domestic animal cat, somebody can raise the question, why is it called a cat? What is the reason? What is the basis? What is the justification? Now, what is the answer? The answer is no, we don't have any basis. We don't have any justification to call it a cat. Everybody calls it a cat, so therefore I too call it a cat. Maybe my parents taught me to call it a cat. Maybe my teachers taught me to call it a cat. Maybe my neighbors taught me to call it a cat. So therefore, I am continuing the tradition. So which means there is no connection between the sound and the object it refers to. There is no actual inherent a priori connection or association between the signifier and the signified. So therefore, the nature of the linguistic sign is arbitrary. What is the meaning of arbitrary? There is no connection between this word and what it refers to. On the contrary, imagine a snake enters the room, and what kind of sound does a snake make? The snake makes a hissing sound. Or imagine I'm sitting in my room in my university, a bee enters my room, and what kind of noise will it make? It will start buzzing around. So you take the word hiss, H-I-S-S, or you take the word buzz, B-U-Z-Z. So what happens? In these two cases, that is onomatopoeic words, what happens is there is definitely a connection between the sound and the meaning. There is a connection between the signifier and the signified. Okay, so in all languages we have a few onomatopoeic words, and in the case of these onomatopoeic words, there is a definite connection between the signifier and the signifier. But in all other cases, that is 95 to 97, 98% of the words, there is no connection between the signifier and the signifier. There is no connection between the sound and the meaning. There is no connection between the word and what it refers to. The sign is arbitrary. So this is the second major theory of Saussure. The third major theory is langue and parole. Now, I am using the French terms because this is what experts do. Normally, they do not translate it into English. They continue with the French terminology used by Saussure himself. So, what is langue and what is parole and what is the connection between these two? Okay, now to put it in very simple terms, langue would be the social dimension of any language. The social dimension of Malayalam would be langue, and it is an abstract dimension. Now, what about parole? Parole is concrete and individual, and it is always associated with speech acts. In other words, the Malayalam that you speak, the Malayalam that your brother speaks, or the Malayalam that your mother speaks, or the Malayalam that your neighbor speaks, or the Malayalam that your head of the department speaks, all these are concretizations or individual instances of the use of Malayalam. So they would come under the category of parole. Now, the grammar of Malayalam, if I speak a word in Malayalam, you will say, no, the pronunciation is not right, or the grammar is not right, or the syntax is not right. So, which means you're talking about Malayalam as a language, Malayalam as a system, Malayalam as an abstraction. So, that would be langue. So, therefore, langue is an abstract dimension and it is social or communitarian. Whereas parole, on the other hand, is individual, is personal, and at the same time concrete. In other words, if you are looking for concrete instances of Malayalam, whether it is in the spoken mode or in the written mode, then we have to approach individuals. So the Malayalam that you speak, the Malayalam that your teachers speak, the Malayalam that your relatives speak, you put together all these, then you get, or they emerges the common, the communitarian or the social dimension of Malayalam. So langue is something larger, it is social, it is collective, but abstract because it talks about the system, particularly the grammatical system, whereas parole is personal, individual. The way you use Malayalam in your speech and the way you use Malayalam in your writing. So langue and parole. And what is interesting is Saussure gave a lot of importance to langue rather than parole. In other words, he was focused more on the system rather than individual utterances, whether it was in the spoken mode or in the written mode. And there is an interesting observation by Jonathan Culler, Culler, Jonathan Culler. He wrote one of the first books on Saussure. I think it was in 1976 that Fontana series brought out a monograph on Saussure written by Jonathan Culler. So he says, you look at the contemporaries of Saussure. So Freud was Saussure's contemporary, and Emile Durkheim, one of the founders of modern sociology, along with Max Weber. So you look at all the three, they were more focused on the underlying system. So for instance, if you talk about Saussure, Saussure was more interested in langue than parole. And if you go to Freud, Freud was more interested in the unconscious than in the conscious. So therefore, the focus was more on langue, the system as such, rather than parole. And this is the third major insight. Fine. Now, the fourth major theory or the fourth major insight is differential identity or relational identity. Now, imagine there is a child at home or there is a child in your neighbor's house. You have to teach that particular child, he or she, different colors. So what will you do? If you have to teach red, will you show a red ball, a red bag, a red flask, a red shirt, a red frock? This is one way of teaching, and certainly not a good way of teaching. A better way of teaching is you have, let us say, balls or balloons of different colors, and then you teach the child to distinguish one color from another color. Okay, fine. Now, why do we do this? The reason is because linguistic signs are arbitrary. Arbitrary means there is no connection between the signifier and the signified. So essentially, there is nothing in the linguistic sign. So because of the arbitrary nature of the linguistic sign, whenever you need to talk about a linguistic sign, whether it is in terms of the signifier or in terms of the signified, you have to contrast it with the other linguistic signs within the same system, both at the level of the signifier and at the level of the signified. And Saussure calls it differential identity or relational identity. For instance, if you go to Terry Eagleton's book, Literary Theory and Introduction, he says, what is rat? R-A-T, what is rat? He says, I don't know what is rat, but I can contrast rat with cat. I can contrast rat with dog. I can contrast rat with snake, both at the level of the signifier and at the level of the signified. So why this differential approach or relational approach? The answer is very simple. Please look at the last two lines. Terms are not substantive, but only relational or differential. And the reason is because linguistic signs are arbitrary. We can talk about linguistic signs only in relation to other linguistic signs, of course, within the same linguistic system. And this is the fourth major theory of Saussure. And we come to the fifth major theory of Saussure. Now, how do we use language? For instance, we have a sentence like this is a table. So how do we get this sentence? How do we form this sentence? How do we formulate this sentence? And the answer is syntagmatic and paradigmatic. In other words, how does language work? How does language operate? It works or operates at the syntagmatic level and at the paradigmatic level. Now let me go back to my earlier question. This is a table, this is a sentence. But how did I form this sentence? How did I formulate this sentence? I take the word this and I combine it with this, then I get this is, then I combine it with an article, an indefinite article, then I get this is a, then I have to complete it by using a noun. This is the table. So which means this plus is plus a plus table. So which means the horizontally I have been adding up words. So which means how does language work? Language works at the syntagmatic level. And please remember the syntagmatic dimension works or operates along the horizontal axis, and the logic behind the syntagmatic dimension is contiguity or combination. This is combined with is, this is combined with a, this is combined with table. So this is at the horizontal level or at the syntagmatic dimension. Now language works at another level as well, and that is the paradigmatic dimension. So you go from the horizontal axis, you go to the vertical axis, and you take the last word. Okay, so the last word, there is a paradigm, and this paradigm you have words like table, chair, bench, watch, shirt, mobile, laptop. Yes,
Sorry
you
for
can.
the interruption, sir. The slide
Yeah.
is still on linguistic science, sir.
Is it moving now?
No, sir, it is still on linguistic science. Yes, sir. Now it is visible, sir.
Okay, now it is visible. Okay, so dear friends, I was talking about the syntagmatic dimension and the paradigmatic dimension. I was talking about how did we form this sentence, or how did we formulate this sentence. This is the table. Okay, so the logic behind this is words are strung together or words are combined together. So this is combined with the verb is, then this is combined with an indefinite article a, This is combined with a noun table. So which means language works along the horizontal axis, and the logic behind this operation is the logic of association or the logic of combination. So this is combined with is, which is combined with and this is combined with table. Now, dear friends, language also works at another level, and this is at the paradigmatic level, or along the vertical axis, where instead of table you can have the word chair. Instead of the word chair, you can have the word bench, and bench could be replaced by shirt. Shirt could be replaced by watch. Watch could be replaced by bench. Bench could be replaced by college. College could be replaced by university. In other words, you have a choice. You have a paradigm. And all these words are nouns. So therefore, instead of table, you can have chair. Instead of chair, you can have bench. So in other words, you have a choice of words and you have to select. I repeat, you have to select the appropriate word and fill in the blank so that the sentence is not only complete but meaningful. So therefore, the question is, how does language work? Okay, how do you speak Malayalam? How do you write Malayalam? So you speak Malayalam based on the syntagmatic dimension, where you combine words so that you get a meaningful sentence, and you also work along the paradigmatic dimension or the vertical axis, and this is how language works. And dear friends, the last insight of Saussure is, I am not going into that, semiology or semiotics. Semiology, the Europeans would prefer the term semiology, whereas the Americans would prefer the term semiotics. Both are the same. And the meaning is, it is a study of signs and symbols. So dear friends, this constitutes the first part of my presentation. So I have talked about the difference between diachronic and synchronic. I have highlighted the nature of the linguistic sign. I have talked about lan and parole. I have talked about the paradigmatic and the syntagmatic dimensions. And I would like to conclude the first part of my presentation with this. Please remember 2 points. Number one, all these 5 theories have dual dimensions, part A and part B. Lan, parole. Signifier, signified. Diachronic, synchronic. Syntagmatic, paradigmatic. So all these 5 concepts have dual dimensions, have 2 dimensions. And Saussure makes it clear, he makes it abundantly clear that we cannot separate one from the other. They are like 2 sides of the coin. But all the same, Saussure makes it known that his preferences is for the synchronic dimension rather than the diachronic dimension. And he also makes it clear, he also makes it abundantly clear that his choice is lan rather than parole. Please go to the second paragraph. I make it clear. Synchronic dimension is important because language is subject to historical change. Therefore, it is not dependable. And the only way to talk about any language is to look at it synchronically. That is what constitutes language at a given point. You take Malayalam. Malayalam has been growing. Malayalam has been evolving. So that is a diachronic dimension. Okay, but if we have to analyze language from a linguist course in general linguistics, what are the 6 major concepts or 6 major insights contained in this book? Now, very briefly, what is structuralism? Because the topic of my lecture is Saussure and structuralism, an overview. So I have finished the first part of my lecture, who was Saussure. Now the second part of my lecture, what was structuralism? I am using the past tense, what was structuralism? I have 4 definitions. Maybe I don't have the time to go into all the 4 definitions, but let me talk about the first definition and the 4th definition in the next slide. Now, one of the earliest books on structuralism was by Terence Hawkes, Methuen series, and the title of the book is Structuralism and Semiotics. I'm sure you have copies of this book in the library. Not a bulky one, maybe some 130 or 140 pages. You please go through it. So Terence Hawkes, trying to define structuralism, he would write, structuralism is fundamentally a way of thinking about the world which is predominantly concerned with the perception and description of structures. Now, the second definition, this is taken from a philosopher, Richard Kearney. The title of the book is Modern Movements in European Philosophy. Please go to the last sentence. What does structuralism do? It looks for the deep and often hidden structures beneath the surface manifestations of meaning. Okay, so Terence Hawkes would say structuralism talks about structures. Richard Kearney also says structuralism talks about structures, but instead of talking about surface structures, it talks about street structures. Instead of talking about the structures that are manifest, it talks about hidden structures. I'll come back to it. Now, here are two more definitions. Now, there is an interesting book on Saussure, The Cambridge Companion to Saussure, edited by Carol Sanders. So, the first chapter, that is by Carol Sanders. So, she talks about structuralism. It is a long quote, but basically there are two ideas. So, Carol Sanders would argue, number one, structuralism is multidisciplinary. You have structural linguistics, structural anthropology, and structural criticism. So it is multidisciplinary, but the inspiration or the blueprint for structuralism came from Saussure's course in general linguistics, and this is the argument of Carol Sanders. Now, please go to the last quote on structuralism, and this is by David Lodge. Lodge would argue, structuralism sought to explain and understand cultural phenomena. And what do we mean by cultural phenomena? There is a wide range, from poems to menus, from primitive myths to modern advertisements, as manifestations of underlying systems of signification. In other words, what exactly is structuralism? And can I give some examples, particularly for the benefit of students? Sure, I'll give you some examples. Fine. So the first thing is, you look at the word structuralism. So structure, from the word structure, you have this formation structuralism. So structuralism is all about structures. And when we talk of structures, invariably we talk of surface structures, structures that are visible, structures that are obvious, structures that manifest themselves. And we also have structures that are deep down, hidden underneath. So you have surface structures and you have deep structures. Okay, now you go back to Saussure. Saussure talks about parole and lang. Parole is what is visible, the Malayalam that you speak, the Malayalam that you write, the Malayalam that your teachers speak, the Malayalam that your teachers write. So they are individual instances, the concretizations, the manifestations. So that would be parole. Okay, but the rules that govern the way you speak Malayalam or the way you write Malayalam, so that would be lang, L-A-N-G-U-E. So what is visible is parole and what is not visible is lang. And please remember, I already clarified that Saussure attaches more importance to the hidden structures, to the system, the grammatical system as such, rather than the individual concretizations or manifestations. So which means, what does structuralism talk about? Two things. Number one, it talks about structures. But rather than, it was in 1957 that he came out with his book Mythologies. Mythologies not from an anthropological point of view, but from a linguistic, a structuralist point of view. So this is where he demonstrates how the deep structures work. Now I'll give you a simple example. Now if I were to ask you, what did you have for breakfast? Okay, I'll tell you what I had for breakfast. I had idli and sambar. Maybe some of you had idli and sambar, maybe some of you had dosa and sambar, or maybe some of you had bread and butter or bread and jam, or maybe some of you must have had puttu and that kadala kolambu, whatever it is. Okay, fine. Now I had idli and sambar. Now imagine, as I was eating my breakfast, as I was eating my idli and sambar, imagine I asked my wife, can you bring me a puppet? Can you bring me, in Tamil we call it appalam, I don't know what you call it in Malayalam. Okay, so we use the word puppet. So what am I eating? I'm eating idli and sambar. Okay, halfway through, what do? I ask my wife for an appalam, for a puppet. Now my wife screams at me, "What? You want puppet with Italy? How funny." So this was the response of my wife. Okay, I'm imagining. Okay, so this actually didn't happen. I didn't ask for a puppet, but imagine, had I asked for a puppet as I was eating my idli and sambar, my wife would have found it very funny. She must have thought something is wrong with me. Okay, why? Because appalam, puppet does not go with idli and sambar. Idli and sambar, that belongs to one semiological system, and puppet belongs to another semiological system. Imagine I had rice and sambar, then I could have jolly well asked for a puppet. So which means what is visible on the surface and what is not visible, what is hidden, the deep structures. So the deep structures would tell me, okay, idli will go with chutney and sambar. Okay, puppet will go with rice and sambar. They belong to two different systems. Okay, so who says that this A will not go with B or B will not go with A? It is the underlying system. That is the deep structure. That is the LAN. So this is basically structuralism. And let me go to the third part of my presentation. Now, in 1975, Jonathan Culler, the British expert, he came out with a brilliant book called Structuralist Poetics. In fact, this was his PhD thesis, and he was the first one to do his PhD research on Saussure and Saussurian linguistics, and later he published his PhD thesis as a book, and the title of the book is, the first part of the title is Structuralist Poetics, and there is a long subtitle. Okay, so I have 3 slides on Structuralist Poetics. Okay, so I would like to talk about 4 ideas. Is my screen visible? I am on slide number 13.
So
Yes? Yes,
it's on 7, number 7, I think.
oh my goodness. Is my slide moving?
Yes, sir.
Okay, is it on 13? Structuralist Poetics?
Yes, sir. You're
Yes,
on 13.
yes, sir. Now it is 13.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you for alerting me. So, dear friends, the next
Thank
three
you, sir.
slides, the next 3 slides, I would talk of Structuralist Poetics, but I would be banking heavily on the book by Jonathan Culler with the same title, Structuralist Poetics. Fine. Now, I would like to talk about 4 important ideas with reference to Structuralist Poetics. Now, the first idea is Culler, based on Saussure. He clarifies individual elements in a set from orange or red from white or red from black. Okay, so it is in this context that Saussure through Culler argues, individual elements in a system do not have any substantive value. So which means we cannot study a literary text in isolation. Okay, so a literary text becomes meaningful when you place it alongside, when you place it along with the other works of either the same author or different authors. And that is why Peter Barry, in his book Beginning Theory, he argues, please look at the second paragraph, the quote from Peter Barry, we have to understand the individual item by placing it in the context of the larger structure to which it belongs. In other words, I'll give you a very simple example. Imagine in your syllabus, in your BA or in your MA curriculum, John Keats's Ode is prescribed, Ode to a Nightingale or Ode on the Grecian Urn. Okay. Now, even though only one ode is prescribed, even though only one poem is prescribed, it is not enough that you focus only on that particular poem or that particular ode. You have to relate it to the other words. For instance, the poem that is prescribed is Ode on a Grecian Urn. It is not enough that you focus only on this particular word. In order to have a holistic understanding or a comprehensive understanding, you need to understand, you need to study Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to an Autumn as well, because you have to situate Ode to a Nightingale or Ode on the Grecian Urn in the context of the other Keatsian words. So this is what Jonathan Culler means by the argument individual elements in a system do not have any substantive value. You have to correlate it. Okay, so this is the first point under structuralist poetics. Now, the second point under structuralist poetics is, please look at the third paragraph, the quote which is printed in red. To structuralists, meaning lies in the work itself and not behind it. And this would be the birth of the death of the author. When we go to post-structuralism, we talk about, we pronounce and we declare the death of the author. The famous essay by Roland Barthes published in 1967, The Death of the Author. Now the origin is structuralism, because structuralists argue, if you are looking for the meaning of a poem, if you are looking for the meaning of a short story, if you are looking for the meaning of a novel, you find the meaning in the text itself. So meaning is embedded in the text, meaning is buried in the text, meaning is enshrined in the text. Do not look for the meaning of the poem, the meaning of the short story in the life of the author, or among the socio-political, cultural factors that were behind the composition of this particular poem. So therefore, structuralist poetics makes it clear to the structuralist, the meaning of the literary work, the meaning of the literary text lies in the work itself, in the text itself, and not behind it. So this is the second major theory of structuralist poetics. Now I'm on slide number 14. Is my slide visible? Slide number 14. Can you please answer, the organizers?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Now on slide 14.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, fine. Now this is a major insight, and look at this. There is something printed in blue and something printed in red. Now this is the third idea, the third major idea as far as structuralist poetics is concerned. Now structuralist poetics focuses not on individual works of literature. I'm using Jonathan Culler's very famous term or very famous proposition, but on the study of literature itself as an institution. Look at the words. The study of literature itself as an of a given novel, of a given short story. You can do it, and there are a lot of examples available. One of the best examples would be, you go to Peter Barry Beginning Theory. He gives you an example how to do a structuralist analysis of a poem or of a short story or of a novel. So the answer is yes, it is possible to undertake a structuralist analysis of a literary text. But what Jonathan Culler means is, structuralism operates on a larger scale, on a wider canvas. Instead of focusing on individual poems, instead of concentrating on individual novels, instead of zeroing in on individual short stories, structuralism would like to focus on the institution of literature itself. What is literature? What constitutes literature? How does literature come into being? Look at the word poetics, the theory of literature. So therefore, Jonathan Culler would argue, if you talk about structuralist poetics, the focus is not so much on the individual text, whether they are poems or short stories or novels. On the contrary, the focus is on literature, the institution of literature, and underlying this argument or undergirding this argument, you have Sassou's famous proposition that lang is more important than parole. What is parole? What is visible on the surface is parole. What is lang? The system, the grammatical system, the literary system. Or if we can use Chomsky's terms, Noam Chomsky, that's the transformational generative grammar specialist, there is a move or there is a transition from competence to performance. So this is the third major idea of structuralist poetics. Now we go to the last major idea of structuralist poetics. I am on slide number 15. Is my slide visible? Can you please answer my slide number?
No, sir. It's no, sir. Yeah. Now
Okay.
it's
Okay,
Now
fine.
it's visible.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I have already talked about three major insights as far as structuralist poetics is concerned. So this is the last one, the major one. Now you go to the 8th or the 9th line. I have given an example, pushing a ball between two posts. Okay, I would like to draw your attention to this particular line printed in red, the third line from the bottom. Okay, I have given an example, pushing a ball between two posts. Now, what does it mean? Pushing a ball between two posts. Imagine there are two individuals, A and B. A is a football player or a football fan like me, or there is B who doesn't know anything about football, who has never watched any game of football, whether football or hockey. He or she doesn't know anything about sports, anything about football. Fine. Now, what is the act? What has happened? A ball has been pushed between two posts. What do I do? And what does B do? I clap. Why do I clap? Because I know a goal has been scored. But there is absolutely no response from B. Why? He also witnessed the same event, but there is absolutely no reaction. Why? Because he doesn't know anything about football. He doesn't know what a goal is. He doesn't know when a goal is declared. He doesn't know anything because he is not familiar with the system of football. So, in other words, you use this example, and then what is the lesson that we learn? What is the lesson that we draw from this example? The lesson that we learn, or the lesson that we draw from this example is this: shocking, utterly shocking. It is not individuals like you and me who create meaning, but it is the system which creates meaning. I repeat, it is not individuals like you and me who create meaning. Had that been the case, why did structuralism displace the human person, throw out the human person, dethrone the human person, or destabilize the human person? Because structuralism argues individuals do not create meaning. You and I, we do not create meaning. It is the system that creates meaning. So therefore, please go to the last two lines. Structuralism not only brackets the author, but it also brackets the reader and the socio-political conditions of production. In other words, for structuralism, it is the system that matters. It is Lang that matters. So dear friends, I talked about Sassou's major theories. I talked about what is structuralism, and I have also talked about structuralist poetics. I'll skip the next part. I'll go to my last slide. So my last slide is, what is the connection, or what is the passage, or what is the transition from structuralism to post-structuralism and deconstruction? I do realize that in the afternoon you have a lecture on post-structuralism and deconstruction, and that too by a well-known scholar, Dr. Bennett, who is one of my close friends. So he will give you an enlightening lecture on post-structuralism and deconstruction. But my job is to track the passage from structuralism to post-structuralism and deconstruction. I am on slide number 17. Is my slide visible?
No, sir, not yet.
Is it visible now? Slide number 17?
Yes, sir. Now it's visible.
Okay, thank you. So this is my last slide. So my job is to track or to chart or to map out the connection or the passage or the transition from structuralism to post-structuralism and deconstruction. Fine. Now the first point is, I would like you to recall, to remember the arbitrary nature of the linguistic sign. In one of my earliest slides, it was my third slide, where I talked about what is the linguistic sign, what are the two dimensions of the linguistic sign, and I also highlighted the nature of the linguistic sign. And what was the example that I gave you? What is the connection between the word CAT and the animal it refers to, the animal it points to, the animal it signifies? The answer was, there is actually no connection between the word and what it refers to. It is only arbitrary. Okay, fine. Now, what has happened is in 1968, Jacques Derrida, the founder of deconstruction, post-structuralism, deconstruction, they are more or less synonymous, even though there is a minor difference. Anyway, I am not going into that. So you call it post-structuralism, you call it deconstruction, there is absolutely no issue, there is absolutely no problem. So in 1968, Derrida delivered a lecture. The title of the lecture was Difference, and in the same year he published it as an article. Now, difference, the word difference is a French word, and even in French it is not a regular word. It is Derrida's own coinage. It is a portmanteau word. And Alan Bass, who translated it, he says this French word difference that Derrida brought into circulation in 1968 is a combination of two different verbs. And what are the two different verbs? To differ and to defer. What is this to differ and what is this to defer? So I'll talk about it very briefly. The word rat is different from dog. The word chair is different from table. The word watch is different from mobile. So one linguistic signifier is different from the other linguistic signifier. One linguistic signified is different from other linguistic signifieds. Fine. Now, if I were to ask you, okay, so the students here, when do we arrive at meaning? Okay, so the question is, when do we arrive at the two? You have to combine the two, you have to wed the two. So the signifier should be connected to the signified. Okay, I have the word. So what should I do? I open the page, the right page on the dictionary, locate the word and find out the meaning and match the word with the meaning, match the signifier with the signified. But what happens? When do you arrive at meaning? You arrive at meaning when you match, when you combine, when you relate the signifier to the signified. But this meeting, this association, this union is deferred, is postponed, deferred endlessly, postponed endlessly. So therefore the question is, why is it deferred? And why is it deferred endlessly? Now the answer is, because of the arbitrary nature of the linguistic sign. I repeat, because of the arbitrary nature of the linguistic sign, the association or the union or the commingling between the signifier and the signified, between the word and the meaning that has been referred. So what is the conclusion? What is the result? What is the consequence? What is the implication? The implication is we have only signifiers and no signifieds. So there is no linguistic signified, and Derrida doesn't stop here. Not only is there no linguistic signified, Derrida would go a step further, a step higher, and then argue there is no transcendental signified also. So therefore Derrida comes to the conclusion, because there is no signified, there is no linguistic signified, nor transcendental signified, what we are left with is only play. And that is why, please remember the paper that Derrida presented at Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, Structure, Sign and Play. Okay, so dear friends, I have talked about who was Saussure, what was his major book, and what does that book contain. And we made a transition from Saussure to structuralism, because structuralism is based on structural linguistics, which is another form, another nomenclature for Saussurean linguistics. And from structuralism to structuralist poetics. And very briefly, I talked about the passage from structuralism to post-structuralism and deconstruction. And I would like to conclude with these words. In fact, Derrida himself, I repeat, Derrida himself in one of his interviews pointed out, I have done nothing new. I do not claim any originality. So Derrida himself confessed, all that I did was to push Saussurean theories further and further. He says Saussure started it. It was Saussure who started it, but he did not see the end. He stopped somewhere in between. So what did I do? Derrida answers, I pushed it further. And interestingly, Derrida uses the term, I pushed it further to its disconcerting limits. And this is Derridian deconstruction. And this is my last slide. Is my last slide visible? Can you please answer?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Is it visible now, references?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible.
Okay, so this is my last slide. So those of you who are interested in Saussure, let me start with the last book. So this is the original one, Ferdinand de Saussure Course in General Linguistics, translated by Wade Baskin. Okay, so these are the students of Saussure, Bally and Sechet and Redlinger. Okay, so this book was published in 1959, the English translation. Then, of course, the best book is the monograph by Jonathan Culler by Fontana. It was published in 1976. The title of the book is Saussure. Then in 1975, okay, so this was Culler's PhD thesis, later published in the form of a book. The title of the book is Structuralist Poetics, and the subtitle is Structuralism, Linguistics, and the Study of Literature. Then you can also refer to Terence Hawkes, one of the early. So I take this opportunity to thank the organizers for having invited me to speak on Saussure and structuralism. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tina John. Thank you, Dr. Trisena. Thank you, Dr. Prasida, and thank you, Ms. Priyanka. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Any questions?
One student has posted a question, sir.
Yes.
Could you please explain the term transcendental signified?
Okay. So what is transcendental signified? Because I did talk about linguistic signify. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Okay, I talked about linguistic signified, and I also talked about transcendental signified. I think Dr. Bennett, he's speaking on post-structuralism and deconstruction in the afternoon, so he will be answering this question. Now, on my part, I will be very brief. Okay, so now the question is, the broader question is, how do we define Derridian deconstruction? What is deconstruction in the first place? How do we define Derridian deconstruction? Now, Derridian deconstruction is usually defined as an attack on traditional Western metaphysics, especially phonocentrism and logocentrism. I repeat, the question is, what is deconstruction? What is Derridian deconstruction? So Derridian deconstruction is an attack on phonocentrism and logocentrism. What is this phonocentrism? Privileging of speech over writing. Phone, sound. So sound is more, speech is more important than writing. So that is phonocentrism, and Derrida attacks it. What is this logocentrism? Logocentrism, logos. Okay, so logos is a Greek word which means foundation. Okay, so all of us are searching for some foundation in life, something, maybe a person or an ideology or a cause that will serve as a foundation for our very existence. So that could be called a transcendental signified. Just as the signified gives the meaning of a word, the transcendental signified, as opposed to the immanent one, will give meaning to one's life or one's existence. So it is associated with logocentrism. And more about it, I think you can hear it from Dr. Bennett. Thank you.
Please come forward with your doubts and clarifications. If you have doubts, please post it in the chat box. Well, if you have no doubts, let's move on to the last part of the morning session, vote of thanks. Respected speaker, Dr. Joseph Raj, Dean, School of English and Foreign Languages, Gandhigram Rural Institute. Dr. Sister Gisela George, Principal, Mercy College. Dr. Sheena John, Head of the Department of English, of English. All the paper presenters and participants of the day, faculty and students. Good afternoon. It's my Sorry for the technical glitch. I continue. This session, as all of you will agree, was a fruitful one. Dr. Raj has elaborated upon the 6 major theories of Sesho in a lucid manner. Sir, your reference to Malayalam language and writers like Tagari and Sachidanandan was particularly interesting. I, on behalf of my colleagues in the department, express my deep sense of gratitude for this enlightening lecture. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I would like to thank our principal, Dr. Sister Gisela, for the support and guidance extended and for the friendly and approachable manner she has. Thank you, sister. I also wish to acknowledge with gratitude the meticulous care with which our head of the department, Dr. Sheena John, organizes all the ventures of the department. As you all know, an event like this cannot happen overnight. It requires a lot of planning and a number of willing souls to help out. I have been fortunate enough to have been backed by a team of very supportive colleagues. I take this opportunity to thank them. I thank all the paper presenters, other participants, and students for making this event a success. With your active participation and, I thank all of you for making this event a success with your active participation and gracing this session with your virtual presence. Thank you. Before I wind up the session, let me remind you to fill in the feedback form. The link to the form has been posted in the chat box. 2 p.m. Okay. Let me remind all the participants that the post-lunch section will begin at 2 p.m. We will be admitting you all from 1:50 p.m.